If you enjoy vertical weekly logs, but you're getting a little bit sick of the styles that you've been using recently, then I have 12 different ideas that you can use for your next layout. As we go through, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks as to how you can tweak these layouts to put them into your own style. And our first tip is actually just to play around with whether you want to use a vertical layout. This layout is kind of what I would consider the very borderline between a horizontal and a vertical, mainly because the boxes we're using for each of the days of the week are just a little bit longer than they are tall. Typically when we think about a vertical layout, we're thinking about cutting the page into sections vertically, so having columns for each of the days, whether they be a full column or a half column, something like that. This one does technically cut both of the pages into columns, so you can see we kind of have a left-hand column and a right-hand column for each of them, but then each of these columns has been divided into 3 sections, or 3 rows. Over the entire of the page, this gives us 12 boxes, but there are only 7 days in the week, so we can dedicate some of these to decoration. If you wanted to tweak this further, maybe add in some trackers or a gratitude log or something, you can just swap out the sections that have the decoration and put in those trackers or logs. For the purposes of decoration in this video, I'm just using some tape from the washi tape shop. These ones are individual kind of square tiles, so they make for a very nice stand-in for any other type of decoration that you might want to put on the layout. So of course, in tweaking these to make them your own, change out the types of decoration, change up the color, the lettering styles, but in terms of the dimensions of this layout in particular, you can see those on the screen here. I'll be giving you one of these kind of schematics for each of the layouts so that you can very easily recreate it for yourself if you want to. Flipping on over, our next layout idea is a bit more of a traditional vertical. You can see we have 3 columns per page, but rather than starting each of the daily columns at the top of the page, we've alternated where the decoration is either at the top or the bottom for each of those columns. For those kind of mosaic tiles, I just trimmed them down so that they could fit, and you can do a similar thing with washi tape, stickers, doodles, or anything else you want to use for decoration. While our last layout had a box for each day of the week, this one has the weekend combined, but it's good to note that you don't actually have to compromise. You can make this just a Saturday box, and then when you flip over to the next weekly, start on a Sunday. It is a lot easier to divide each of your pages into like 3 and then have 6 per spread, rather than try and divide each page into 4 and then have 8 sections, but only really need to use 7 of them for the week. Rather than making it a specific week per spread, you could just make it 6 days per spread and use as many pages as you needed to for the month. If you're in a 30-day month, that just means 5 spreads, nice and easy. If you're in a 31-day month, it's a little bit trickier, but it is a good way to change up your style of weekly logs. In terms of the dimensions for the layout, you can see them here. I've just put in blocks of color to indicate where the decoration is, rather than actually putting in pictures of the tiles themselves. Mainly because, as said, you can sub in your own type of decoration, you can put in trackers. For each of these daily boxes, if you don't just need a large checklist, you could make it so that the bottom of the box has a gratitude log or a meal tracker, anything that is kind of key information for you to put on your weekly logs. For this layout though, you can see that we have again divided each of the pages into 2 columns and 3 rows, but that central row is just taken up with decoration. This is again one of those layouts that kind of borders the horizontal vertical layout, mainly because each of the sections for each of the days is kind of more square than it is a long rectangle, but the nice part about that is that it gives ample space writing horizontally and still adequate space going vertically. Because we do have 8 sections to write in, this last one I've just dedicated to notes, but you could sub that out for more decoration, maybe put the non-day space up the top here and include a mini calendar or some kind of decorative header. And by making these little changes, you can very much make the layouts your own and also make them different from week to week, which is kind of nice too. We have the dimensions for my version of this layout on screen here, but you can also play around with how much space you dedicate to that central row, how much decoration space you actually want to have, if you want to make each of the boxes for the days of the week just a little bit longer, or I suppose shorter as well. On to our next layout idea. This one has a large decorative panel at the top, though you could of course switch it and put it at the bottom if you wanted to. And as for the columns, we've divided each page into 3 columns for 6 columns total. That does mean that this last one here is a shared weekend space, but for each of the weekdays, so Monday through Friday, we have a space for work tasks and a space for home tasks. One of the ways that you can kind of help organize information in your weekly logs is by separating things out in terms of their kind of theme or life area, possibly possibly location if that helps, so stuff to do at home versus out of the home. And along the bottom of each of these boxes, I've also included a health tracker. Each of these has 8 dots, so maybe it's for water intake, it could be for like amount of steps taken, hopefully more than 8 steps, maybe, so possibly like how many thousand steps have been taken. And then so that we have a tracker for each of the days of the weekend, we just have 2 of those in the bottom corner here. Showing off the schematic for this one, it's also good to indicate that on our previous layouts I highlighted every second row, so that's one way that you can change up the kind of styling or appearance of the layouts. As said, we can use different colors, different types of decoration, so effectively think of all of the layouts that we're showing off in this video as kind of just a general scaffold. I do try and make them a little bit decorative so that they look nice. Just a little more pleasant to look at layouts that feel a little bit more, I don't know, put together. But if this color combination or this decoration style isn't really for you, think about how you could tweak it so that it would be more in your style, it would be more kind of in line with any theme that you've got going on for your journal for the month. But on to our next layout idea. You can kind of see that when it comes to vertical layouts, my preference is to have 3 columns more than anything else, mainly because I think it still offers a decent amount of horizontal writing space for any of my tasks or events, but also gives adequate space vertically to write lots of stuff down. For this one, we do have a box for each of the days of the week, so Monday through Saturday along the top, and then Sunday at the bottom. That effectively means what we've done here is split each of the pages into 3 columns and into 2 rows. Now it might be a little harder to see the rows, so if we just consider the very right hand side here, you can kind of see that that top row holds all of those days of the week, and then our bottom row is for this day of the week, and then anything extra you want to include. This could be solely for decoration if you want to, or you can put in some trackers, have a section for notes, maybe a weekly task list if there are things that need to happen at some point during the week, but you don't necessarily want to dedicate them to a specific day. For each of the daily boxes, I've highlighted the top few rows for like an events or priorities space, and then just dots underneath this to house the checklist for the day. In terms of tweaking this one, probably if I were to use this for myself, I would make the decorative space a little bit smaller, just so that those trackers at the bottom of the page could take up a little bit more space. But I thought these tile designs were kind of cute and I wanted to use them in their entirety. On to our next idea though. This one sees us making the horizontal space on the page a little bit smaller by adding these panels of decoration down the side, using what I call the 8-box weekly, so essentially taking each of your pages and dividing them both vertically and horizontally in half. We still get ample writing space even with this side panel decoration. You can see on the schematic here that each of the boxes for each of the days are 5 centimeters across, or 10 dot grid spaces, and 9.5 centimeters down, or 19 dot grid spaces. In this one, I haven't put any kind of like buffer between each of the boxes. You could certainly do that if you tweaked the sizing of the panels on the side or made these boxes a little bit thinner, but it also just goes to highlight there are other ways to set up your weeklies to make them look a little bit different. In this one, we have box borders, whereas on the last one, we didn't have borders at all. And on a previous one, we kind of get an indication of where those boxes are by using the second line highlight throughout the entire of the box. On this one though, you can see I've highlighted the bottom of each box to indicate a space to maybe write in the meal for dinner or lunch or whatever meals you're trying to plan for yourself. And I also highlighted the bottom of the notes box, mainly because I was on autopilot, but also because I think it makes it look a little bit nicer, a little bit more balanced, even though this one doesn't necessarily need a meal written down for it. For our next idea though, this one is another that's based on 3 columns. We have some decoration running down the bottom, but because that decoration is a little thinner, it means we still have ample writing space for each of the days. Monday through Friday has a time ladder at the top. You can see that indicated with the second line highlights here, and then the numbers for the hour running down the side. And then underneath each of these we have a daily task list. As for the weekend days, these ones just get the daily task list. They're stacked along the side here. And this is the type of layout that I would typically use when I was a teacher. I wouldn't necessarily have it as a time ladder. I'd instead have this separated out based on school periods. So because my school had a 6-period day, I'd have a box for each of the 6 periods and then just a task list at the bottom. You can also build more features into a layout like this. So having a section at the bottom for any kind of trackers, logs, things that you want to record on a daily basis. But in terms of the sizing that I've used on this layout example, you can see that on screen here now. In terms of how I make these little schematics, they're made in Excel using a bullet journal spread planner, and that one's available to people who are in our channel membership, and also is available on my little shop for purchase. Both of those are linked in the description box though. Flipping over, and for our next layout idea, this one highlights the fact that you don't actually need to use the same amount of space for every single day on your weekly. For instance, I know that for me, Mondays and Tuesdays are my busiest days of the week. They're the ones that I get the most done, I have the most tasks to write down, they usually take up the most space anytime I'm doing daily logging. If I wanted to convert that into a weekly log, it means that I'd probably want to include more space for those days compared to other days in the week. I know by Thursday, for instance, my energy kind of plummets. I usually don't have that many tasks to do, or well, I might have things to do, but I don't usually get around to doing them. You can see on this layout though, we have decoration in the top left and bottom right, which means that we have a column for Monday, which is yay big, the same size for Tuesday, but when we get to Wednesday, you can see that that one is just a little bit shorter. If you wanted to go with this kind of a scaffold, but you didn't necessarily need the long task lists for Monday and Tuesday, you can of course just tweak which days you put into which of the sections, or play around with where you put the decoration so that you can have smaller or larger segments in the right places. You can see on this one we have Monday through Sunday and then a space for a task list down the side. And having a look at the general scaffold for this layout, I've again just used every second line highlights to indicate the sections for each of the days of the week, but you could go in and close them in boxes if that's more your style. On to our next layout idea, and rather than splitting into 3 columns per page, for this one we're splitting into 4. This is kind of more akin to how I would make a monthly log, so having 4 weekdays on one side and 3 weekdays on the other. But if you're doing this on a weekly spread, then we have a nice long column for each day of the week. The weekend doesn't have to share, it doesn't have to get split, but the horizontal writing space does get smaller. When it comes to writing in my tasks, I personally find this spacing to be a little bit too narrow for me, but I do know that this is a style that other people enjoy. Because we have so much vertical space for each of our days of the week, I dedicated the top section to be for that time blocking, so going from 6 AM to midnight, and then the bottom section is just for a task list. Because we only have 4 days on one side and 3 on the other, that means we have a nice panel for decoration down the side here, but you could also put the decoration down the bottom or at the top of the layout if you didn't really need boxes that were quite so long. If you have very small writing, there is a lot of space to write in this layout. Over and on to our next one though. This one sees the return of the 3 column weekly, though technically at the bottom we have 2 columns, so this is kind of like a combo or a split system. At the top we have each of the days of the week with the weekend shared, though as mentioned before, you could just make this Saturday and have the same style of weekly again the next week and put Sunday in there. At the bottom we have space for tasks, so tasks that don't need a specific day to be done on but just at some point in the week, and then a little track down the bottom here where we have a column for each of the days of the week and a row to write out each of the habits or routines you're trying to keep track of. One of the main ways that I like to tweak or change weeklies so that I have the same kind of information but a different layout is just moving where the decoration is. You can see that given the fact that we have a blue section and a pink section, you could just put the decoration in between the two of them, or you could put the decoration at the top if you wanted to, or remove the decoration entirely if you needed more writing space for either your task list or your habits or any of the days of the week. It is also good to note that even though I've used 2 different colours for the line work on this one, you do not have to do that. I just thought it was a good way to show the difference between a day of the week box versus the task boxes at the bottom. So far we've really just looked at weekly spreads, but what if you wanted a 1-page weekly layout? Well, we do have some examples of that as well. This one is based on what I call a 9-box weekly, so you can see we have 3 columns and 3 rows, giving us 9 spaces on the layout, but I've used 2 of those for decoration because we only need 1 for each of the days of the week. As we talked about previously, you can switch these out and put in additional information, so possibly turn this into like a mini calendar with a header and then a simple kind of routine tracker down the bottom. Again, I've used alternating colors here just to make it look a little more visually interesting, but you could just use the same color throughout the entire of the layout. If this does not offer you enough vertical space to write though, if you just want a little bit more space, then maybe something like this layout could be more useful. You can see for this one, we still have 3 columns, but in terms of rows, we only have 2. That means we do only have 6 boxes, so I've put the weekend together, but you could just make it Saturday and put Sunday on the next layout. This one I think is a really nice balance between having enough horizontal space to write and having ample vertical space for lots of recording. And on this one I opted to put the decoration down the side rather than having gaps between each of the different boxes. You can see on the layout on the left we have that column of empty space between each of our boxes, where on this one we just have a line that sits on the dot grid and each of those boxes kind of butt up against each other. So another possible way to tweak the styling of your layout to really make it your own. Vertical layouts are definitely my preference when it comes to weeklies, but that doesn't mean they're the only ones that I try. I do encourage you to tweak and change things so that you can find styles that work for you. And if you are on the hunt for more weekly layout inspiration, then I have a mega video that shows you pretty much every weekly layout I have ever used. I'm the kind of person who likes to change my weekly layout pretty much every week, so I have quite a few ideas in that one. It's worth having a look at, so click or tap on that video and I'll see you over there.